Well, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. So, you have joined the project launch event for the Race 2030 B4 Flexible Demand Project. So, let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country on which I'm on today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation up in Sydney, and recognize their continuing connection to lands, water, and culture. Pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm Liz Fletcher. I wear many hats, but what I'm most proud of is sitting on the board of the Energy Efficiency Council. So that's brought after many years for finding new and exciting ways to get energy users more involved in the market, which is very topical for this discussion. So we have many people on the line from around the sector. And they are all here, like you, to hear about this exciting project, which is headed up by Stephen White from the CSIRO. So Stephen's going to join a panel of experts with real-life stories about unlocking industrial flexibility. And once you've heard from Bruce, Mary, and John as well about their experiences, we'll open up the discussion, and you'll see a Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom to ask your questions of our panelists before the team from A2AP, Jared and Rob from EEC, will run you through exactly how you can get involved in this exciting project. So why flexible demand? One of the most interesting things about the Australian energy market is that we are putting on more and more variable generation, and that means the value of flexibility is increasing. However, unlike many places in the world, we haven't really unlocked that flexible load that's sitting in the market. That is obviously a big challenge, and especially in a market like Australia, where we're actually experiencing times where we have minimum demand. So we have times where there's so much solar and wind that we're getting negative prices. And so John from Northeast Water will actually talk us through what happens on his site when they are actively pumping water to use more power during those times. Because while battery technology is an increasingly viable option, it does come at a cost, especially when there is equipment across the country that could be used to soak up this power at different times of the day. The tricky bit is setting up the business models, customer offerings, to make it easy for customers. Because the reality is the buildings, the pumps, all of these operations were not designed for that purpose. And so we need to figure out how we can make sure it's simple for them to participate. So that's the purpose of this project, bringing together the technology research and the users to figure out how we can weaponize the operations to streamline the integration of renewable energy so we can move towards a net zero economy. So without further ado, I'm going to interview Stephen White from CSIRO, who's heading up this project, and he's going to introduce the opportunity assessment by giving you an overview of the project and the timeline, including the expected outcomes and, of course, the importance of this project. Over to you, Stephen.
Beautiful. Thanks very much, Liz. Great introduction. So you can see my screen. So thanks very much, Liz. And this is in fact the very first project to get off the ground in the Race for 2030 Cooperative Research Centre. It's just one of a number of opportunity assessments to get up, but this one was one of the first to kick off, and we've got 17 partners representing all the different stakeholders in the energy system, and the team that's delivering on it. We've got 5 partners: the Energy Efficiency Council, Alliance to Save Energy, Alliance for Energy Productivity, CSIRO, RMIT and UTS. So just giving a little bit of background there on the race CRC and the interest in this particular area. What I've got is a little infographic there, which was just showing the interest of a whole bunch of organisations inside the race CRC in the different areas. We've got Race for Business program, we've got Race for Homes and Race for Networks. So B4, this is the one that we're talking about, flexible demand, is just one of a number of research themes inside the race CRC. And this flexible demand area is looking at the business opportunities for providing flexible demand. On the one hand, it will have an interest in the actual control technologies themselves and the new business offerings that can be provided in flexible demand, but also helping consumers and end users to implement flexible demand. So there's a real sort of how do we do it perspective there, but then also the frameworks of policy and markets that go to enable that. And Liz mentioned already some of the issues there. So in terms of the project itself, you know, I'm sort of here presenting to you as perhaps as the Gantt chart jockey, the project manager, looking to coordinate the effort of the 5 delivery partners and ensure that the needs of the industry and the 17 project participants are well met. And we're focusing on sort of gathering the evidence base, of course, for an opportunity assessment project. You know, what's been done before and what's the state of the art, both from a technology perspective and also from a market perspective, but also having a lot of consultation to tease out some of the ideas that are sort of gems in people's mind that could actually provide solutions in this space. And it's that intersection which this opportunity assessment is driving for, which is what could or should race do in its 10-year life in this area of enabling of flexible demand. It is an opportunity assessment, so I feel a need to calibrate expectations here. When I came into CSIRO, the CEO was talking about you know, that sort of tension between going a mile wide, that is covering a lot of territory but not going very deep, versus a centimetre wide and really going deep on any one thing. Being an opportunity assessment, it's definitely closer to the mile wide, centimetre deep. We are there to unearth the material across a wide range of areas and point to where the deep research is required in future. It's not to actually do the deep research, it's to identify where that research is required. And hopefully to start to tease out, as I said, those sort of sparkles of ideas that are percolating around, particularly amongst the CRC participants, to identify how we solve the challenges. So the project plan that we're driving, we had our first industry reference group meeting just before Christmas and a second one at the beginning of February. So we're already into it. And I've sort of got 3 stages here. This first stage is very much about gathering the evidence base. And so doing the literature reviews. Clearly, this is not a new area. There's been lots of work done before, but just to synthesize that into one place, but importantly, to actually start talking with people. So holding interviews and focus groups and doing surveys to gather that initial base of information. So literature reviews led by CSIRO with the help of RMIT and Race CRC. The interviews and focus groups led by the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity, and the survey work led by RMIT. That sort of culminates in the first of our big workshops called the Barriers and Opportunities workshop. And then we take the findings from that and we begin to model out how much we believe is accessible demand response or flexible demand, and start to review also not just from the perspective of individual end users and what they can do, but how it can impact upon the system. Starting to gather some of those, glean some of those ideas that people have got, hold our second big workshop, the Research Opportunities Workshop, and then take the findings from that, synthesize that, and look at road mapping, what it is that the CRC could be doing in its first years of operation. And we will bring that back to you, the industry, to confirm that, that we are on the right track. So very much a sort of a process-based work plan. We don't want to sort of preempt what the answers are, but a lot of consultation. So as good project manager, I'm concentrating on the deliverables. There will be a research state-of-the-art report. Bear in mind that the Cooperative Research Centre is that. It's a research centre, so making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel in the research space is really important. And there'll be a series of discussion papers on subtopics underneath the broader topic of flexible demand. There'll be a barriers assessment report. That's a deliverable of the CRC to the Commonwealth. Workshops, and I mentioned those two big workshops in addition to this inception workshop and a forum and this and a final forum. We will have some preliminary models, but I go back to the fact that we're not aiming to create the definitive model of anything. We don't have the resources in the available time, but at least to start to get a handle on some of the evidence as to where we should be pushing hard. Ultimately, the project looks to deliver a research roadmap on a page. That would be ideally an infographic that really explains to everyone what the CRC could do in this space. And when I say a page, you know, whether that's an A4 page or an A1 page, hopefully it will be very understandable to people, and wrap that up with a report. Project all done and dusted by the 4th of June, so it's a very ambitious agenda. And I've highlighted in green, I guess, the two things that I'm most passionate about in terms of making this a success. One is that we've engaged extremely strongly with you, the industry. And the other is that we create a really good evidence-based, impact-focused roadmap that can guide the CRC and its investment over the next few years. So that's my summary of the project, and I just really want to thank the team. You know, there's a lot of moving pieces here, and everyone's really dug deep. Working hard over January when everyone else was meant to be asleep. So it really is quite a privilege to be leading the team. So I'll stop there. You've got my contact details. Hand back to you, Liz.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Really appreciate that outline, and it just shows what an exciting body of work this is. So next we have Bruce Precious from Six Capitals Consulting. So he's going to run us through the insights from a commercial buildings perspective, based on some work that was done by the Better Buildings Partnership. Bruce, would love to hear more about that perspective. And you're going to share your screen?
Thank you, Liz. Yes, just let me share my screen. Should be good to go. There we go. Congratulations, Stephen White, and the Race to 2030 team for getting this and kicked off as #1 project. And thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce everybody on the call to the Better Buildings Partnership Demand Management Planner, a new guide that's available from the website that you can see there on the bottom left of the screen. I invite you to go there now and download this document. As it says here on the slide, it's about preparing buildings to integrate seamlessly with the renewable energy grid. The Better Buildings Partnership is centred in the City of Sydney. It's a partnership with the city and 13 of the largest property building owners in the city. Those 13 owners are responsible for a little over half of the commercial office space in the city of Sydney. So have quite some critical mass and influence not only of that portfolio, but across their property portfolios Australia-wide. And the need for the planner came about because different organisations were being approached by energy efficiency and demand management aggregators, or people that saw themselves fulfilling that role in the future and discussing the application of demand management. But there was a bit of a barrier in terms of the language and understanding of the opportunities. And even amongst just the Better Buildings Partnership crew, there were diverse perspectives on the role of demand management in buildings. So, as we've said, there's a recognition that with renewable energy moving into the grid, that the grid will operate in a different way to the past. You can see there the recent announcement from Mervac that they've moved to procurement of 100% renewable electricity, and they join a number of the owners in their very aggressive net zero targets that see renewable energy as one of the primary strategies. In moving to procurement of renewable energy, there's that recognition that there needs to be participation by buildings in that balance of supply and demand across the grid. This is an example of one of the buildings that's been certified under the Climate Active certification scheme as carbon neutral or net zero emissions already. It's one of 31 buildings that are recognised through the Neighbours program that a lot of people will be familiar with. Not only does the building manager, the management team, purchase 100% renewable electricity, they purchase 100% renewable electricity for the base building or the landlord components of that building. And Google as a tenant, as one of the more significant tenants in the building, are also a 100% renewables company. So it's a good example of what we expect the future to look like, energy efficient buildings that run on renewable energy. In devising the demand management planner, one of the aims was to simplify the demand management process, make it understandable by facility managers and operations teams. We were able to get the guide down to 9 steps and to, I think, clarify some of the language to determine whether a demand management project was really trying to satisfy a generation constraint, a transmission constraint, or a distribution constraint, and to create some more common language about those different opportunities. As an example of some of the content of the planner, there is some brief detail in understanding the energy bill and understanding demand tariffs. Certainly during the creation of this document, it became clear that even for the energy geeks of the world, understanding a tariff, say in the Ausgrid distribution area compared to a demand tariff just up the road in Parramatta. So between Sydney and Parramatta, the demand tariffs are significantly different. And if you're going to run a demand management project, it requires that you understand the tariff in significant detail. And there was a recognition amongst Better Building Partnership members that there was probably, amongst that 3.2 million square metres of space just in the Sydney area, there was probably $1 million left on the table, or $1 million being spent by consumers that would have been better in their pockets, and that demand management, responding to demand charges such as shown on the example bill there, would return to them. As another example of the content of the planner, seeking to define the purpose, set targets, understand whether the project that you're looking to deliver is designed to provide particularly a financial perspective. Is it being done for environmental and emission goals, or is it more a social benefit and playing a part to ensure that playing a part just to make sure that the grid stays on for everybody. one of the first barriers that I think the demand management planner seeks to overcome is a recognition that getting data together in a way that's useful is going to be a challenge for many facilities managers. So these are pretty old school Excel charts that seek to understand how energy is used in a facility. We need much better data and information systems to bring not only that data together, but to bring that data together in a place where it's with the tariff data, weather data, and potentially the comfort data from the building itself. We need to aggregate those sets of data so we've got some real information about the demand management opportunity in a building. Stepping right forward to step 6, and something that was recognised during the creation of the planner was just the number of stakeholders that need to be involved in getting a demand management project to operate effectively. A lot of people need to be involved, and from a market transformation perspective, it's clear that we need to create awareness and have information go out to a broad range of contributors to demand management projects. And I don't see a vehicle for that happening in the market at the moment. I don't see anybody approaching the air conditioning industry, for instance, to ask to help create awareness and to help them understand their role in demand management projects. Stephen may have a little more perspective on that, but certainly from a commercial air conditioning perspective, we don't really see that happening. So there's some opportunity there for certain. So there are the links for further information. The Demand Management Planner is a really nice companion document to another one that's just been released by the Facility Managers Association, which is the Good Practice Guide to Energy Management. The details there on the screen. So there are a whole bunch of things that we need to simplify. Tariffs are a particularly opaque price signal at the moment. We need to get, as I said, we need to get that data put on a screen with our usage data so that we can truly understand the opportunity for demand management in buildings. In terms of a call to action for those that are on the line, if you're in the technology space, I think this data aggregation and information systems, dashboards, automation of demand management, there is significant opportunity. Amongst those that might be regulators, I think the simplification and consistency of tariffs and making that information much more easily obtainable and understandable. For researchers, I think in terms of commercial property, understanding this junction of thermal inertia in buildings, which is effectively an energy store, if you like, comfort, productivity in buildings, and how we can be more flexible in the operations is an area of great need. And amongst those electricity retailers is that opportunity to continue to build service offerings and to help disseminate information that makes the demand management opportunity much clearer to consumers. So that's our little case study on creation of a demand management planner. Look forward to the rest of the discussions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bruce. That was fantastic. It's so good to see it explained in such a simple and easy to use process. Now, from the framework perspective, we're going to move into John Day from North East Water, who has a real living and breathing example of demand management in practice. So I'm just quickly going to add that there's a Q&A at the bottom of your screen, which you can add any questions to, and then we'll get to them once we get to the Q&A later in the session. So John, I might hand over to you so we can hear about how North East Water is making money while the sun's shining.
Yeah, I wish it was as good as that, but some days it's good, some days it's, yeah, maybe not so good. So can everyone see that? Can you see that, Liz? That's all good?
So we've just got your PowerPoint view, not the presentation view right now.
Okay, which do you want me to go back to the presentation view?
Yes.
Oh. Oh, I can just go through the PowerPoint view. That'd be all right.
Yeah, so if you just exit out of that, we'll be able to see the PowerPoint. So if you go back to normal view.
Okay.
End slideshow at the top.
Sorry.
Just end slideshow right at the top. So,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
End slideshow. Yes, sorry.
Perfect.
Is that better?
There we are. We can see your slides.
Okay. So I'll kick off. This story is a big story, and I'm only going to go into one part. So if I use the analogy that was put in before around shallow and deep, that's what I'm going to go into today, very shallow and deep. But if I went wide, there's a whole story around solar generation, wind generation. What else have we done? Hydrogen generation. There's a whole heap of stuff that we're currently doing. Biocapture, generation, waste energy, a whole heap of stuff. But this is one part of it and one part of the story that we've done so far. So those who don't know who North East Water are, we're in the northeast of the state of Victoria. We service 54,000 connections, about 150,000 customers, and cover from up in the mountains in the catchment of the Murray River system, right from Corryong across to Benalla and Wodonga up to Harriettville. So who are we and why does it matter? Well, that hasn't shown up too well, but what we do is we take water from catchments, we put it through water treatment plants, we put it through reticulation systems and then go into storage tanks. It's important just to think about that storage tank space because if you think about it as a battery, it really tells the story of what I'm going to tell today. So once we've made water and treated water, we put it into storages and then we run off those storages and we turn everything else off. So obviously in a demand management world, that's really handy because it means that we can manipulate when we use power. On the other photo, you'll see there, which is our wastewater treatment plants. We don't have a lot of say over those. So wastewater treatment plants run pretty much 24/7 and we have some ability to turn off, but not a lot in demand management. So why would we do demand management is the next part. So some years ago, and this is a nice little slide by our energy retailer, Flow Power, we decided that we would buy off the wholesale market. Traditionally, we were buying off, we've been buying peak and off peak in a locked contract. But what we were finding is it gave it no flexibility and it really didn't set us up to be successful in the energy space. So we then went on to buy off the wholesale market. At the time, buying off spot made a lot of sense to us because I think it was around $40 megawatt hour. It was nice and cheap. So it was cheaper than what we were getting out of the peak and off peak because obviously the retailer was carrying the risk. Going onto the wholesale market spot price, we carried the risk. Of course, Hazelwood got turned off and then it changed the way we thought about energy and then we responded to that. So that's where we came up to this, where we started to look at where energy's used during the day and the highest price during the day. So what we did was we overlaid. So we're lucky in Victoria, obviously, because we've got smart meters. We were able to bring all of that meter data back in through our SCADA systems and able to see online when our plants were running overlaid on the cost of energy through the market. So if you have a look at this, you can see the two green bars. That's when the market price is at its highest. And you can also see on the blue bars, that's when we were actually using energy. So that's a site that wasn't good. So we were using energy at the most expensive time of the day for the wholesale market. So then what we actually did was moved most of our sites to profiles like this. So when the price went up, we were turning things off or shutting things down and running them at periods when they were at the cheapest. And this was before we do anything else in demand management, this is the smartest thing you can do is just move everything out of this high priced events. And if you get everybody into that stage or all of our plants, and we've got 32 sites exposed to the wholesale market, it gives you a chance to then not have to worry about automating this because you're actually just avoiding that. Now, when the prices went up as high as you know, $120, $140 megawatt hour. Still at night, it was dropping down, you know, probably down to $80, sometimes $60. So we were buying power at that price instead of buying power price in those green bars of, you know, way up around that $140 mark. And I've shown you one there from back from 2017 when it was really at its worst. So we also then started to participate in the VRET scheme from Victoria, where we get paid to actually shed energy. So we sign up to reduce our energy consumption at our sites for a designated period of time. This was a peak price event that happened back in, it was 2000, what have I got there? I think I even got the date there. Sorry, 2018. So we had a peak price event where it went up to $12,000 a megawatt hour. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, our retailer then sends us a SMS text to say, start shedding power. The power event will happen. And in this case, it was late in the afternoon. So the first thing we did, you can see in this sort of representation, because we've got those clear water storage tanks, so that water or energy stored, we're able to turn all our water treatment plants off first. So you see the drop in the market. Then we've got our lagoon systems, which we can turn aeration off, and lagoon systems for a longer period. So we turn those off. You can see another drop in our energy consumption. So this is our 32 sites aggregated up. And then we turned off our largest site or shut down parts of our largest site at West Wodonga wastewater treatment plant. Now, what that actually helped us do was avoid paying $30,000 of charges if we had have stayed at that level of consumption. And at the same time, we were paid for turning that energy off. So also through our retailer. So we're able to get close to about $30,000 in credit as well. So effectively, we saved $30,000 and also made $30,000 by being a part of that program. Now, the only issue with this is it's a very manual in approach. So we get the alarm sent through to us in text messages. Text messages go through our operators. Our operators, we've already risk assessed what we can shut down. They start shutting it down. And then when the event's over, they turn it back on. What we needed to get to was that was automated. And the reason why we wanted to automate it is this is the event you see, what we were seeing 2 years ago, but now we're seeing this event on the right-hand side where we're actually got events where power is, if you like, free. So there's more generation than there is being taken up. And so when it's high price, so exposure to peak events, what we did was we actually back up with financial hedges or PPAs. So we've got a wind PPA and a financial hedge that covers off a lot of those peak price events. So even if we don't get the chance to shut it off, we can at least avoid being exposed so much during those summer periods. So we shed at anything above $1,000. So we start that big shedding, because with work we did with RMIT and RMIT students was to identify that anything below $1,000, if we started to shed, was actually costing us more money in repumping and other things. So it was valuable. Anything above $1,000 was time to shed. But the real thing that we're seeing in the last couple of months and what we're taking advantage of is this load price. So what we're actually doing now, and it's still manual in control, but we have a thing through our retailer called a K-Watch controller. And the K-Watch controller sends us a price signal through to our plants to then start up a plant, a water treatment plant, to even know if the clear water storage is full or not, to take advantage of that low price. So basically running the plant for free or free energy at the time when the market is triggered. Now, the opposite of that is obviously the K-Watch controller, and we haven't got to this stage yet because we're still dealing with risk, starts to shut the plant down and identified through a risk assessment which parts of the plant it shuts down when it gets above $1,000. Quite comfortable playing that cheap price market one, but a little bit hesitant in turning things off at the high peak price, because obviously that's also at a time when customers are using the most amount of water. So the risk is a lot higher. But in the event of low pricing, most time it happens early in the morning, there's over generation, and shutting those down is a lot simpler process. So that's really where we've got to. Our next steps, and we've been working with RMIT students each year. They come and do a project with us. We're building a 3 megawatt solar generation behind that West Wodonga plant. We only need 1.5 megawatt, but the other 1.5 megawatt will go back into the grid. Another great thing about being exposed to the wholesale market is excess generation you can put back into the grid and be paid for. Now, obviously, when the market is at its lowest, like you see, then what we effectively do is put it back into the grid, but use at other sites. So we're able to do that under our retail market of generate at one site, put it into the grid, extract it at another site, and basically all you're doing is settling price. So that's a really big winner for us in able to building a solar site, not just for behind the meter, but also other sites that then wouldn't have a footprint to build behind the meter. And that's also been another big win for us. So, you know, lessons learned is really for us is, and I think it was said just before, is understand your market or understand your energy consumption, understand the mechanisms within the market, whether or not you've got the risk to expose yourself to the wholesale market. Cover yourself with financial hedges if you're not strong on being able to shut things down, and then expose sites where you are comfortable of shutting down or also taking advantage of the price of the market. And that's me.
That's fantastic, John. Some of those images are scarily familiar from my time at Flow Power. I feel like amazing the trail that gets left, but that's amazing to hear such a real life example of demand management in practice. So now we're going to hear from Dr. Mary Stewart at Energetics, taking the perspective from that ground level all the way up to the top, so that Mary's going to cover off on what's actually happening in the market at the moment and what the mechanisms are playing through. So Mary,
Thank you.
Ready to go? Awesome.
Thank you. And firstly, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Matt Sprague and Georgia Pick, not only for the work that they did in pulling together the report that this work is based on, but also for putting this presentation together. I'm also going to refer to Stephen's analogy of a mile wide and a centimetre deep. I'm probably going to go a mile wide and about half a centimetre deep. I've also got so much stuff to cover, I'm going to go to 100 miles an hour. So hopefully it will give rise to some questions later on. So the work I'm talking to you about looked at the demand response mechanisms in Australia, looked at the scale and potential of the market, had a bit of a look at the current and emerging technologies, and an overview of the barriers to uptake. And I think that those are probably what's going to be most interesting to the researchers here. So firstly, looking at the demand response mechanisms and who they operate with. They're really 4 demand response operators that these feed into, and there's 7 main demand response mechanisms. So there's the emergency one that aims to ensure that electricity demand is met and the quality of supply is adequate to consumers, particularly during emergency events. There's the capacity market that aims to ensure there's sufficient supply to meet the demand, which is, for example, the WA Reserve Capacity Mechanism, as well as the proposed New South Wales Peak Demand Reduction Scheme. There's retailer demand response, which is used by the retailers to reduce their exposure to high wholesale electricity prices. And they offer discounted electricity prices or other incentives to their customers in exchange for the customers agreeing to reduce the demand when requested. At the moment, only the AGL one is published. There's the wholesale demand response mechanism, which will be implemented in October this year, and will allow large electricity users or aggregated smaller electricity users to offer guaranteed reductions in demand in the electricity market and to be paid for the reduced demand in the prevailing wholesale price. There's the wholesale market exposed end user demand response mechanism. That one doesn't have a handy acronym, where consumers are exposed to the wholesale electricity spot price, and they may reduce their demand in times when the spot price is high and decrease it when the price is low, which was outlined by John just now. There's network demand response, where various DNSPs incentivize energy users to reduce their demand response in specific areas, particularly when the capacity of the network would otherwise be exceeded. And there's ancillary service products, which help balance supply and demand on short notice, including following a major disruption to power systems, such as the failure of a large generator. An example here is the frequency control ancillary services, or FCAS market, which has been established by EMO. So there's 7 different demand response mechanisms. And the question I've always tried to find or answer for clients is what is the scale and what is the value? On very rough estimates, approximately 4.3% of total system load in the NEM is committed to demand response programs. Putting an actual dollar value on it is not trivial. So just looking where it is possible to estimate the value, under the RMIT, there's a total load reduction potential of 5,200 megawatts with a potential avoided cost of 139 million. The WA reserve capacity mechanism is a smaller market, and the contingency, the FCAS, has about 1,500 megawatts of sheddable load. So there's limited or absolutely no data for on scale for retailer demand response, wholesale market exposed, end user demand response, and network demand response. So yeah, this is one of the research questions that I think that should come out of this work. What we also looked at was the potential for different industrial loads to have value in a demand response market. And we've got low demand response potential industries, medium, and then high potential. And this is based on looking at their potential across subsectors, reviewing current activities and identifying where we thought people would really uptake, where there was appetite for uptake. Operational criteria we looked at were large single electrical loads, product storage or buffer capacity, and production flexibility. And the technology criteria we looked at was high degrees of automation, energy storage, and equipment that enables fast response. And just to note here, paper and pulp, the pulp refineries can be switched off for short periods without interrupting the paper machine operation, whereas in chemical production, for example, they've pretty much got to operate continuously. So we just looked at the potential across the different industries for who might be able to engage in this market. Looking at current and emerging technologies, and again, this is quite focused on where we were able to find information. We looked at the demand response enabled devices, on-site generation, thermal storage where it's chilled or ice, and thermal storage where it's hot water. And here we looked at key technologies that support demand response participation with respect to scale, cost pathways, barriers, response time, and growth potential. And just so that you understand what we're talking about here, for relevance, the green indicates the technology is highly applicable with no upgrades required, and red indicates the technology isn't really applicable for demand response mechanisms. The key takeaways from this part of the work is that the demand response enabled devices are likely to increase as they become more established, so they're more likely to represent in the market. And the main barrier currently on these is compatibility with requisite standards. On the on-site generation, being subject to fuel costs, it's likely to be supplanted by solar and storage technologies if economies of scale drive down battery cost as expected. Thermal storage with respect to chilled water and ice is commercial, but has limited applications and opportunities because there's only a certain number of them available. And thermal storage on hot water through things like ripple control is a mature technology. And the trend towards electrification of residential gas heating systems does offer a significant opportunity for growth with respect to demand response in this area. Speaking to some specific technologies, there's the NPOT technology, which addresses the ramp down of aluminium smelters and would enhance our for aluminium smelters provision of demand response services. They do require significant capital investment to get those implemented. Another emerging technology that we looked at was voltage tapping, where the DNSP can tap down transformers to reduce voltage. And one trial that we found information on, the DNSP targeted a voltage reduction equivalent of about 30 megawatt hours capacity. And the benefit there was the end user experienced no impact in service. The battery storage is obviously growing as battery prices come down, particularly for medium-sized storage, so the 4 to 8 hours of storage. And it's relevant to most demand response programs. the costs can be a significant barrier, but as I said, they're falling rapidly. And the other one that's very obvious in the press at the moment is virtual power plants, which have a strong opportunity for growth. They're relevant again to most of the DR programs that we looked at. They rely on control and data management systems and do require development to enable the optimization and control of distributed batteries. So that feeds into the last piece of work that we did, which was looking at the barriers to demand response uptake. And this is the fullest slide, because mostly when we talk to industry about demand response, we find more barriers than we do opportunities. And you'll see that we've divided the responses here into barriers associated with market, technical barriers, financial barriers, behavioral, and data and information. So under the market barriers, people know most of these. What constitutes an event for the purposes of activating the route is limited. So baselining electricity use is only straightforward for consistent loads that are not particularly sensitive to the weather. The wholesale market response mechanism baselines, we find that admin costs may reduce uptake. It just is very, very difficult to engage with it. The EMO registration requirements for batteries over 5 megawatts. The registration process, again, is very arduous and introduces some compliance requirements that companies aren't willing to engage with. And the WEM capacity market doesn't enable batteries to participate. On the technical side, as we said, some of the industries have no processes that are suitable, and there is a lack of smart meters in homes, so the data is limited on the domestic side. We're also seeing some, as Bruce was referring to, some of the data science and analytical techniques are still being developed. And I referred earlier to the need for the air conditioning units to comply with the Australian standards. For me, the three that really stand out are the financial, the behavioral, and the data and information, because the rest should be easy to solve. Financially, companies aren't really willing to engage with this because there's uncertainty on the return of investment. And much uncertainty in the market. And it's not without its costs. Some of these things do cost a lot. Just looking at the behavioral work, and demand response isn't necessarily considered at the design stage, and it would be much easier to engage with demand response if it was essentially a set and forget during design. As Bruce highlighted again, there's a need, and John for that matter, there's a need for manual responses, both from households and businesses. Very little of this has been automated. And there's also the need for participants to register their participation. An area of focus that RACE could consider in the program going forward is on the data and analytics side. Because all the data streams are there, we just need to make them talk to each other. Part of this is a lack of understanding of the value of demand response, and then again, the limited access to metering information. I've noticed with the rollouts of the NBN code, the change in domestic meters from requiring a SIM to being Wi-Fi enabled should be making a step change to some of this market. It'll be interesting to see what happens off the back of that. I see that Liz has appeared and would like me to stop talking, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm sure can answer some questions later in the session. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Mary. I promised that Mary asked me to turn on my camera, so I'm not just doing it for the sake of it. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask each of the speakers to turn their cameras back on so we can see their lovely faces, and suggest that if you have any burning questions, that you populate them in the question and answer that you'll see at the bottom. There's a lot of great messages to our lovely speakers about their presentation, and I have some questions personally. So how about I start with those? So can I ask each of our speakers to pop on their cameras, which they have, which is fantastic. And I'm going to kick off. So Stephen, you started with a fantastic presentation about the project. Can you just give us a bit of a rundown? There have been a lot of studies into this topic. What is so different about the B4 project?
Thanks, Liz. Yes, and we're not here to reinvent the wheel on this. We're here to gather all that evidence together. But I think the work that we're doing is particularly timely. I think that's one of the key things. So we've got systemic sort of change being mooted. We've got the ESB with the two-sided market and all this sort of discussion around that. So I think the supply side of the industry is interested now to some extent. But also on the user side, I think a willingness to start to consider participating partly through climate change and renewables, partly through perceptions perhaps of a bit more risk in the industry. So I think we're sort of at a point where we can actually have more robust and fruitful discussions with end users. So that would be one thing I think that sort of means that it's just timely, and so we'll be able to get better information. And the other, I think, is this is a purpose-driven piece of work there to identify work that will be done by the CRC. So it really is kind of very much leading towards an investment agenda. And so I think that that sort of differentiates this study from some of the other more sort of theoretical things as well.
I think that's a really interesting construct, and I'm going to go to Bruce just on that topic and around the regulation piece. Bruce, as part of the Better Building Partnerships publication, I think it's on the inside front page, you refer to the NEO. Do you want to flesh that out in the context of this?
Well, the National Electricity Objective talks about the efficient investment in efficient operation of electricity services for the long-term interests of consumers. So that's the summary of the National Electricity Objective. But when you reflect back as a consumer group, if you like, of electricity, and reflect back at how easy it is for consumers to play their role in the operation of the grid, then, as I said before, the opacity of some of the price signals, and I'm sure the regulators are quite proud or satisfied that there are price signals in the market that allow us to respond, but those price signals are so well hidden that consumers find it very difficult to find them, let alone respond to them. And I think there was a simple example on one of the slides I showed where Ausgrid doesn't call it a demand charge, they call it a capacity charge. Now, I don't know whether they're signalling that they're going to turn the demand charge into a capacity charge at some point in time so that there is no way to make a saving there. But that immediately creates a point of confusion for the consumer. I won't name the distributor in this case, but let me read you just an element of the price list, the tariff price list, where a variable metered demand charge is calculated by multiplying the demand price in excess of the lower threshold and detailed in Table 16 by the rolling 12-month maximum half-hourly demand at a connection point expressed in kVA minus the lower threshold, with the result multiplied by 1 minus the discount. Now, you can spend 3 days to try and unwind what that tariff is made up of and how it's charged. And we're expecting a facilities manager of a building to understand that tariff and to act and respond in response to that price signal. And I think it just demonstrates that that while the objective is right, I'm not sure that the regulator and the regulated parts of the network are holding true to that objective.
So if we then go to Mary and her discussion about the blockers, I think that feeds quite well off what you've just said, Bruce. Mary, in your work, did you see some of the blockers that emerge around the communication per se of these signals?
I mean, the two places where the message isn't getting through properly is the availability of information to support the business case. But the other place is, and it was hinted a bit at what Stephen's response was, is that the business case isn't always built on dollars now. And it is increasingly going to be built on companies' efforts to decarbonize. So that's where the two pieces of information aren't necessary, or the communication isn't happening properly.
And so just feeding off one of the questions that's come through from the audience is in relation to data access. Do you think that the data could be a pivotal piece, and data access be a pivotal piece that the RACE project could look at?
I don't know if data access for some of the industry streams, some of the industry partners have the data available, but it's more the data analytics that overlays on the top of it, and making sure that the interpretation of those data is good and is readily available. We heard from John and from Bruce around manual intervention and manual decision taking through the processes. You don't want that to happen.
I think that's really interesting. In the context of John Day's experience, and the reality is Northeast Water, if I think about it from a product adoption curve, you guys are so far in the early adopter category that you've navigated all of these challenges. Do you think there was something different in your corporate culture or in what was happening in the organization that meant you were able to navigate some of these hurdles?
Yeah, it's interesting, Liz, because if I look at most of the larger metro water corporations, they actually have dedicated resources for this, so energy people within their business. I'm the operations manager, so for my driver was keeping price down for our customers. I partnered with our finance manager, who has also managed our, paying the bills. So he and I knew that we weren't getting a really good deal out of the off-peak and peak pricing. So we were frustrated with that. It was through a combined sort of a procurement system that we bought with other water corporations, and we knew we weren't getting a great deal. So we actually went out on our own, and it was through, and you'd know David, but it was meeting people like David through FlowPower and others, that actually David Evans, who set us up on what's available out there. And I think that's the problem, and I think Bruce brings it up. I mean, if a guy's managing a building and he's got a million other things to be going on, has he got time to go and have meetings with other people around energy and alternatives to energy and processes? And for us, what drove us to be an early enabler is, we took a big risk by buying off the wholesale market, which some might say, and even our board thought we were crazy. They thought we were magnificent when it was $40. And they wanted to get rid of us when it was $160, and wondered why we were doing that, when the wholesale procurement that had gone on was still only paying $40. Now, what happened for those guys was they laughed at us and said, you guys are exposed, you're getting hammered. And then within 2 years, they were all coming off that and had to pay $180 equivalent price. Now, we were on the stage where we were going down the other way and we're paying less than $100. So some of that exposure to risk and then learning from it, but having a board or a business that's willing to accept some of that risk, you might not have that in some businesses. You might not be able to take on board being exposed like that. So we were just lucky in that space. And it's surprisingly, Hazelwood made us adapt very quickly.
I think, yeah. And so one thing that I should say is that there are plenty of options for exposing yourself to the spot price and all these other offers in the market. But yeah, I obviously have experience of what you're talking about. I think there's just a question in here, and Mary touched on this as well. John, have you looked at FCAS and other types of services in the market in order to build that revenue stream?
Yeah, we have. And I didn't go into it, but I mean, there's a whole, we're doing a whole heap of work around at the moment about hydrogen generation. And the one thing about hydrogen generation is its waste product is oxygen. The one thing we spend the most amount of money on in a wastewater treatment process is oxygen. So if we could actually take that waste product, at the same time use our recycled water to generate hydrogen, and use our excess from behind the grid to make hydrogen, and then hydrogen can be used to run our fleet of cars, it can be used to run energy. You can get this circular loop
So thank you so much, John. I'm just going to say it's International Day of Women in Science today, and we have some great questions, and I know there's women on the line. So I'm going to encourage you to ask a question so that I can make sure that we get that level of representation, which is growing in our space, especially in energy management. But there is a really good question here. And maybe I'm going to direct this to Bruce. As part of the work you did you look at energy efficiency measures enabling DR? So, for example, how increasing insulation on a building to enable free running and those kinds of pieces. And did you see much uptake in that piece in your sector?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, and in the planner where it talks about building the business case, and it points out that energy efficiency projects are likely to have the greatest payback because they're saving money every hour of every year. So that's the first port of call is the energy efficiency projects. I think understanding how that makes a change in terms of demand is something that people struggle a little bit with. But more broadly, in terms of energy efficiency as a demand management piece, the Australian property sector, because of neighbours, is recognised globally as leading the world in this space, and the track record that neighbours can demonstrate of energy performance. I think it's around about halved over the last 10 years. So energy intensity per square metre is coming down more rapidly here than just about any place in the world. So yeah, the energy efficiency piece is well and truly territory that's known to the sector. It's now building on that to look at what do we do about the peak demand piece.
Mary.
And we did also look at it with respect to things like VSDs and the ability to turn down plants in the industrial applications, and that's where we looked at the inability, for example, for mining and chemical production to turn down. So we did look at VSDs and other typical energy efficiency technologies in the context of the industrial loads and how you manage them.
Stephen, is that something you wanted to make comment on too?
Yeah, I think that there's, we talked about the data piece and sort of bringing data together with weather, bringing it together with energy pricing and stuff as part of enabling of demand response, but bringing that data together also supports energy efficiency, building controls, tune-ups. I do acknowledge that what Bruce has said is our buildings industry has brought down energy consumption, but when I talk to a number of players, and indeed pots of funding, there's been a surprising lack of investment in sort of building tune-ups and bringing what Mary said, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, and those sorts of techniques to tuning up buildings, and partly because of the difficulty of measurement and verification and the cost of that, and getting our data all in the one place, I think is kind of a core step both for demand response and energy efficiency.
I should have known that question came from Alan Pearce, the godfather of Neighbours Energy. So I'm glad I gave the right answer. I hope I gave the right answer, Alan.
He's also very interested in the next topic, from my understanding, which is these blockers that we're talking about, or barriers, are they coming from the consumer voice, or are they coming from the market participants? So Nicole Lashman has asked that question. Mary, did you want to cover that one off?
Yeah,
I mean, we're hearing them from the consumer side. We're hearing them from the market side, but most importantly, we're hearing them from the aggregators. And I think we haven't spoken enough about the aggregators' role in driving this market forward. But I'm used to sitting on the client side of the desk. I'm used to sitting on the person who pays the bill. And it's always just too difficult to do. And it needs to be an absolutely, it has to be an opportunity that's too good to miss. And I see the only people who's going to really bring that to industry is going to be the aggregators. So for me, the greatest concern for the people who are seeing the barriers is on the side of the aggregators.
Couldn't agree more. And I think one of the things that you spoke about, Mary, was that this year we're going to get a wholesale demand response mechanism. We'll have 5-minute rule. And so one of the things that I'm seeing anyway is a whole tranche of new entrants into the market, both from overseas and homegrown. Some are tech players, some are that retail player. And I think that is going to mean that end users are spoiled for choice. And it should also bring down the cost to serve.
I think the
choice.
Sorry, Mary. I think the caution there, Liz, is certainly from a commercial building perspective, there needs to be a common language that those aggregators are able to speak and the customer is able to understand. And I think that will be an initial hurdle to be overcome there. There are, spruikers for all sorts of ways to save money, knocking on building doors every day of the week. The market needs to be primed so that the opportunity is understood, and that comes back to that language and a feeling for the consumer that they're comfortable in disclosing energy information, process information, so that they have some feeling that they have control over that process.
But Bruce, don't you think that we're going to see aggregators coming at this more from the perspective of an emissions reduction outcome than a dollar value outcome?
No, because the energy efficiency emissions reduction work is largely taken up and there's practice around that already. I see it more as the aggregators coming from a peak demand perspective, which is doesn't have such a direct emission response. Does that make sense, Mary, or have I missed the point there?
It could do, Bruce, because imagine an amazing world where we have so much flexible industrial load that we don't need gas peaking plants. That's a feasible world.
Or Liz, upgrades to networks.
Upgrades to networks, exactly. That's a really great example, John. So I think that there's an amazing role that plenty of the people on the line will play in that future. And I think it's a beautiful segue because I know that Jared is on the line and wants to tell everyone about how they can get involved in this project. Do you want to jump in there, Jared?
I sure do, Liz. Thanks very much. And yeah, we're really hoping to get plenty of involvement in this opportunity assessment and really build on the work the likes of Engevity has done, and see if we can see a lot more of the John Day cases expand across the network. So this is a quick introduction to say how to get involved, and I want to ask you if you had a wish list of what you would like to see in terms of the barriers that need to change, or the opportunities, or regulation. What's your wish list there, and to allow you to do more in the way of load flexing, and just invite you now. This is a great opportunity for you. It's not as dramatic as this is your last chance, but it is a great opportunity for people to speak up about their issues and what's going on for them, and then that feeds into further research. Just to start off with, though, as introduced, I'm from A2EP, the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity, and we work with a lot of industry and end users to help them pursue a cleaner and more successful future by producing more with less. So it's all about more dollars from less gigajoules with energy productivity. We work in a range of different areas there, from renewable process heating, so things like using heat pumps, heating electrification, and doing some studies on the impact of the grid for that as more process heating is electrified. As well as we've done work in the past with UTS on load management for renewable energy. We also work with compressed air systems and also energy efficiency in agriculture as well. Very much we're about taking roadmaps and research through to reality. It's also worth to note that we're working with other streams within RACE, another one called B3, which is about electrification and renewables to displace fossil fuels, and has quite an overlap with this stream as well. So a few of the people that we'll be calling upon for information and input, there'll be some overlap there, and we're certainly doing our best to minimise the impact on you all as we take in that information. We're also working on another study relating to value chain optimization, and that's essentially looking at end user services and what's the best way to bring that at the most energy productive way. So as mentioned before from Stephen, we've got a couple of main areas of input where we need end users to capture their information. The first one is for barriers and opportunities workshops, and we'll be engaging with a series of focus groups and interviews to capture the thoughts of people into these barriers and opportunities. And very much as it says there, it's trying to ratify, expand the findings of the research to date on barriers and what we know. And it is expanding on the what's been done with the energetics works, of course. And discuss the gaps in the industry, what you see needs to be filled, and also a little bit of brainstorming, and what someone should do in terms of further research. We'll have these focus groups happening in the last week so of February and the first week of March. And we've got identified quite a few people that we need to join us for those, but we're still very much open. And at the end, I'll give you an opportunity to join that and sign up. We'll also need help with the actual resource assessment itself. So, what is the quantum of the size of load flexing capability within the market, within your site? So again, we'll be doing focus groups to talk through that and understand what the requirements are and brainstorming of solutions there. Those focus groups won't happen till a bit later in the process, later in March and early April. And the other part of the third and final part where we're looking to get feedback and input is with a quantitative style of survey. We want to go wide with that one and see just how many people we can get to respond for that. And that survey is coming out next week, and just 1 week to answer that one. And of course, we respect your time, and it'll only be something of a 10-minute or so survey. And hopefully, if we get to the right people, we're sure that you'll be able to fill that out nice and quickly and easily. So the question for you all will be, who should we involve and who would like to be involved? And if I'll put this in this link here in the Q&A chat right now, and then you'll be able to go straight to that SurveyMonkey poll. And let me just open that up. Liz, if we just had a sample question I could respond to and type an answer to, that would be most useful.
We will get that going.
If someone magically just said, what is that link for the poll? And then I'll type the answer to that. If not, I can add it to another answer. Oh, look, Laura Taylor, thanks for asking. And here comes the link for that poll. So that's, hopefully everyone can see that link there. And so this really gives an opportunity for everyone to voice. You think of John Day. He said he's got his K-Watch controller. I mean, do you in your industry have a K-Watch controller? Bruce there mentioning how the commercial air industry needs to come together and have better standards so that everyone can work together. What about industrial refrigeration? Do you have a refrigeration plant on your site? Whilst maybe that's only a few hundred kilowatts, the needs that you would have to be better at load flexing is going to be the same as several thousand other sites. And if we put all refrigeration together, all being able to respond in a flexible manner using, say, more thermal batteries, what would the quantum of that load flexing be? What are the barriers and how would that be done? And this is what RACE will be about, is working through those, through the research that needs to be done to take that to the next level. So Liz, that's it from me. I think as these slides will come out, those connections, the links and surveys and things will be there. Rob, my partner in crime here for collecting information and what have you. Rob, is there anything else you'd like to add to on that one?
Thanks for that, Jared. I have to say I'm distressed by my far less fancy background than yours, but I do have a fancy light to give me this beautiful glow. Hi, everyone. In addition to Jared's work, which is really doing that extra mile in terms of engagement with energy users, which we think is so critical for this project, we're also doing a broad range of consultation in this process. So there's a survey being conducted by RMIT on the technical perspectives. And we also have coming up fairly shortly a barriers and opportunities workshop in a few weeks, which we'll be sending around the details of, which will be a broad look at getting people's ideas on the barriers and the opportunities in demand response. In particular, what we're going to do there is be testing a lot of the ideas that's come out of the literature review and the work that Jared's been doing in order to, we don't want to basically make you go through the hoops that we've already gone through. A lot of that work's being done, but it's really critical that we test the assumptions that we've done there. So that's going to be really critical for people to attend that workshop. In addition to that, what we'll also be doing is doing a fair number of one-on-one interviews and a number of small group interviews with particular areas such as a small number of demand response providers, because we think those perspectives provide a huge amount of value. So one of the things we know in this space is the grey literature, which is another way of saying that things are not in scientific journals or they're in people's heads, is really, really critical. So we'll be going out there and doing that work directly with people. We do have some short lists of people we're going to be engaging in that. But again, there's still an opportunity for everyone to comment, because that work is really feeding into our barriers and opportunities workshop, where a broad range of people can have an opportunity to provide input. And we'll also be coming back to people later on in the piece to do a research opportunities workshop, where once we've worked out through the literature review, through all the great work that Jared's doing in engagement, through the work of RMIT and UTS, we've got a lot of answers together. We'll then come out and say, okay, so we think these are some of the research priorities going forward for RACE and for people outside RACE. What do you think? So if you're interested in any way in contacting us, you can contact the research leader, Stephen White, and his email details are there. Or you can contact me, rob.murrayleach@eec.org.au. And our details are available on our website, or you can contact us there. And we're available to talk anytime on any issues that you want. We're aware of how busy you are, so we want to be very targeted with our consultation and not just harass you continually for information. But we're also aware of how much knowledge is out there, and we're really open to any times you want to engage with us. If you have any questions on how to engage in the program, please do get in contact with myself or Stephen. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rob and Jared, for covering off on that. That's a great next step. So I appreciate that there's a couple of additional questions still sitting in the Q&A, and I'm sure Rob and Jared would love to delve into those topics with you. So feel free to reach out and to either Rob or Jared or any of our other speakers. In the meantime, the recording of this will go into your inbox relatively quickly. And you'll be able to share that with anyone who may be interested. So without further ado, thank you very much to all our speakers, and I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. Thanks so much.